The Breaking Point Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the massive viewing window of Nexus Station, watching the streams of cargo ships arriving from human colonies across the galaxy. Each vessel carried the fruits of human labor, rare minerals from the asteroid belts, engineered crops from terraformed worlds, and manufactured goods that kept countless alien civilizations running. For 43 years, humanity had been the galaxy's most reliable supplier, the species everyone could count on to deliver what was needed, when it was needed. The irony was not lost on her. Earth had joined the Galactic Trade Consortium as junior partners, grateful for the technology and knowledge that had lifted them from a single world species to masters of hundreds of systems. Now, 4 decades later, they had become indispensable. Yet here she stood, preparing for what might be the most important negotiation in human history, and she could already feel the trap closing around her people. Dr. Marcus Webb approached, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of stress. The lead trade representative had been working for months to prepare humanity's position for this summit, and the intelligence reports had been getting worse each week. "Admiral, the preliminary reports are in. It's as bad as we suspected." Sarah turned from the window, her expression hardening. "How bad?" Marcus activated his portable display, showing trade flow charts that painted a stark picture. 78% of the galaxy's food production relies on human agricultural techniques or direct imports from our colonies. 82% of rare earth elements come from human mining operations. Our manufacturing facilities produce 65% of all technological components used by the other species. The numbers were staggering, but Sarah had suspected as much. Humanity's work ethic and adaptability had made them the backbone of galactic civilization. The question was whether the other species saw them as partners or as assets to be controlled, and the proposed regulations? Marcus's face darkened. They're calling it the Galactic Stability Act. On the surface, it sounds reasonable. Standardized production quotas, regulated pricing, shared technological development. But the fine print... He scrolled through the document, highlighting key sections. They want to cap human expansion at current levels. No new colonies without consortium approval. All major trade deals must be approved by the Trade Council, where humanity holds only 2 seats out of 15. Sarah felt her jaw clench. They want to turn us into their personal supply chain. It gets worse. There's a clause about resource sharing obligations that would give the consortium first rights to any new discoveries or innovations, and the enforcement mechanisms. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. They're talking about permanent monitoring stations in human space, for our own security, of course. The meeting was scheduled to begin in 2 hours, and Sarah knew that the other species expected humanity to roll over and accept these terms. After all, they always had before. Humans were the reasonable ones, the ones who made compromises for the greater good. But as she looked out at those cargo ships, each one representing countless hours of human labor and ingenuity, something hardened inside her chest. The main conference chamber of Nexus Station was an impressive sight, designed to accommodate the diverse physiologies of dozens of different species. Sarah entered with the human delegation, noting how the seating arrangement subtly reinforced the hierarchy the aliens had created. The Cathani Trade Consortium occupied the central platform, their elongated forms draped in ceremonial robes that sparkled with embedded gems. To their right sat the military representatives of the Axiom Empire, their bulky, armored forms a stark contrast to the Cathani's elegance. Zexithara, the lead Cathani negotiator, was already speaking as the humans took their designated seats, notably positioned at the lower tier of the chamber. Her melodious voice carried easily through the chamber's acoustic system, but Sarah noticed how the alien's 4 eyes never once looked toward the human delegation as she outlined the benefits of the proposed regulations. The Galactic Stability Act represents a new era of cooperation, Zexithara was saying, her translator converting her natural harmonic speech into flat, emotionless standard. By establishing clear guidelines for resource allocation and production standards, we ensure that no single species can destabilize the delicate balance that has brought us 4 decades of prosperity. Sarah listened to the carefully crafted words, hearing the lies buried beneath diplomatic language. Destabilize the balance? Humanity had created the balance. Without human resources and labor, half the species in this chamber would be struggling to maintain their basic infrastructure. Ambassador. Veltar of the Axiom Empire took the floor next, his mechanical voice grinding through the chamber's speakers. The Axiom were a cybernetically enhanced species, their original biology long since augmented with technology that made them formidable warriors, but poor innovators. Security concerns also necessitate these measures, he declared. The rapid expansion of human space has created uncertainties. Proper oversight ensures stability for all. Sarah felt Dr. Webb tense beside her. They both knew what security concerns meant. The Axiom were worried that humanity's growing influence would challenge their military dominance. But without human-built components, Axiom technology would fail within months. For 3 hours, the other species took turns presenting their case. Each argument was carefully crafted to sound reasonable, even beneficial to humanity. The Kethani spoke of shared prosperity and mutual support. The Axiom emphasized security and order. The smaller species nodded along, playing their roles as supporters of the status quo. Through it all, Sarah noticed one crucial detail. Not once did any speaker acknowledge humanity's actual contributions to galactic civilization. They spoke of resource allocation and production standards, as if these things happened by magic, not through the sweat and ingenuity of human workers across hundreds of worlds. When Quinn Los, the supposed neutral mediator from the Harmony Collective, finally called for humanity's response, Sarah stood slowly. The chamber fell silent, all eyes turning to her. She had prepared a diplomatic response, full of careful language and measured objections. But as she looked around at the alien faces, watching her, some curious, some dismissive, most simply expectant, she felt something snap inside her chest. No, she said simply. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Zexthara's crest fluttered in what Sarah had learned was confusion. I beg your pardon, Admiral Chen? Sarah stepped forward, moving to the center of the lower platform. Her voice was calm, but it carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. I said no. Humanity rejects the Galactic Stability Act in its entirety. A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the assembled delegates. This was not how these negotiations were supposed to go. Humans were supposed to be reasonable, diplomatic, willing to find middle ground. Veltar's mechanical voice cut through the noise. Admiral, surely you cannot be serious. This act has been developed through months of careful consideration by the galaxy's leading economic and political minds. Sarah's smile held no warmth. Leading minds? Ambassador, when was the last time any of you actually visited a human facility? When did you last speak with the miners pulling rare earths from asteroid belts? Or the farmers engineering new crop strains to feed your populations? She gestured toward the viewing windows, where the cargo ships continued their endless stream of arrivals and departures. You speak of resource allocation as if these resources simply appear. You talk about production standards as if the products build themselves. But every single item flowing through this station exists because humans designed it, built it, refined it, or grew it. Dr. Webb stood beside her, his earlier nervousness replaced by grim determination. He activated his display, projecting the trade flow charts for the entire chamber to see. These are the real numbers, not the sanitized versions you've been sharing among yourselves. Without human agriculture, 63 worlds face immediate food shortages. Without human manufacturing, the Axiom Empire's military becomes scrap metal within 6 months. Without human mining operations, 17 different species lose access to the materials that power their civilizations. The chamber erupted in protests and denials, but Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. For 43 years, humanity has been a reliable partner. We've shared our innovations freely, sold our resources at fair prices, and helped build the prosperity you all enjoy. And this is how you repay that partnership? By trying to turn us into your indentured servants? Zexithara's melodious voice turned sharp with indignation. Admiral Chen, You speak of partnership, but surely you recognize that with great capability comes great responsibility. The human species has grown so rapidly, expanded so aggressively, that oversight becomes necessary for everyone's benefit. Oversight? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call permanent monitoring stations in our space? Is that what you call caps on our expansion and restrictions on our trade? No, Zexithera, what you're proposing isn't oversight, it's control. She turned to address the entire chamber, her voice rising with each word. You're all so used to human cooperation that you've forgotten we have a choice. You've become so dependent on our resources and labor that you assume we'll always be there, always ready to supply whatever you need at whatever terms you dictate. But you're wrong. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time, in the history of the Galactic Trade Consortium, a species was openly defying the collective will of the major powers. Sarah could see shock, disbelief, and the first stirrings of panic in alien faces around the chamber. Dr. Webb continued where his admiral had left off, his voice steady and professional. The human delegation withdraws from these negotiations, effective immediately. We will honor existing contracts through their completion dates, but we will not be signing any new agreements under the proposed regulatory framework. You cannot be serious. Veltar's mechanical voice had taken on an edge of desperation. Without the consortium's protection and trade agreements, humanity would be isolated, vulnerable. Sarah's expression was steel. Ambassador, with respect, we've been protecting ourselves just fine. And as for trade agreements, she smiled coldly. I think you'll find that we're not the ones who need this relationship more than the other party. As if summoned by her words, Marcus activated another display showing shipping schedules and delivery contracts. All human cargo vessels will complete their current deliveries and return to home ports. Effective in 72 hours, no new. Shipments will depart human space pending renegotiation of our trade relationships. The effect was immediate and visceral. Representatives from minor species who had remained silent throughout the negotiations suddenly found their voices calling out in alarm as they realized what a cessation of human trade would mean for their worlds. Even the major powers showed cracks in their composure. Zexthara's crest was fluttering rapidly, and Veltar's cybernetic components were cycling through diagnostic patterns that suggested extreme stress. This is economic warfare, declared Horthagal, representative of the Spiral Consortium. You cannot simply cut off entire sectors of the galaxy from essential resources. Sarah's voice remained calm, but her words carried the weight of absolute conviction. We're not cutting anyone off from anything. We're simply exercising our right to choose our trading partners in the terms under which we trade. Something the Galactic Stability Act would have eliminated forever. She began walking toward the chamber's exit, the rest of the human delegation falling in behind her. When you're ready to treat humanity as equal partners rather than as a resource to be managed, you know where to find us. Until then, we have colonies to build and innovations to develop, on our own terms. As the humans left the chamber, the silence behind them was deafening. For the first time in 4 decades, the galaxy's most powerful species were forced to confront a simple truth they had forgotten in their arrogance. Dependence was a two-way street, and they had just discovered which side needed the other more. The age of human compliance was over. What came next would reshape the galaxy forever. The Galactic Reckoning. 6 months after humanity's dramatic withdrawal from the Galactic Trade Consortium, Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of New Havana Station, watching the latest Kethani diplomatic vessel approach. It was the 4th such unofficial visit this month, and Elena could practically smell the desperation radiating from the sleek alien ship. The galaxy had changed in ways that even the most pessimistic human analysts hadn't fully predicted. What had started as an economic disruption had cascaded into a full-scale crisis that threatened to topple the established order. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. The very species that had tried to control humanity were now begging for their help. Captain Rodriguez, came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Torres from the comm station. The Kethani vessel is requesting permission to dock. They're flying under diplomatic flags, but... He paused, consulting his readings. Their ship's life support is running on backup power, and their cargo bay is nearly empty. Elena nodded, grimly. It was the same story everywhere. Without human-built components and human-engineered solutions, the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were slowly grinding to a halt. Grant them docking permission. Standard protocols, but keep security tight. As the alien ship maneuvered toward the docking bay, Elena reflected on how much had changed since Admiral Chen's historic walkout. The initial response from the consortium had been predictably arrogant. Threats of economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, even veiled military action. But humans had learned from their 4 decades in galactic society. They had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone realized. The Cathani delegation was led by Tharksel, who had once been the species' most powerful trade minister. Now he looked haggard, his normally pristine robes showing wear and his bioluminescent markings dim with stress. Elena had to suppress a flicker of sympathy. She remembered when Tharksel had been one of the most vocal supporters of the Galactic Stability Act, Captain Rodriguez. Tharksel's translator rendered his harmonic speech into standard galactic, but even the mechanical voice couldn't hide his exhaustion. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Elena gestured to the conference room she had prepared. Minister Tharksel, though I understand your title has recently changed, the alien's crest fluttered in what Elena recognized as embarrassment. Former minister, yes. The trade consortium has undergone significant restructuring in recent months. That was diplomatic. Understatement. Elena had read the intelligence reports. The Cathani government had fallen 3 weeks ago when food riots broke out across 7 core worlds. Without human agricultural imports, the species that had grown accustomed to exotic crops and engineered nutrients were facing widespread malnutrition. Their beautiful crystal cities were going dark as human-maintained power systems failed without replacement components. I trust this isn't another attempt to convince us to return to the old arrangements, Elena said as they took their seats. Because I can save us both time. Humanity's position hasn't changed. Tharksel's 4 eyes closed briefly, a gesture Elena had learned indicated deep emotional distress among his species. Captain, I must confess something. When we drafted the Galactic Stability Act, we genuinely believed it was for the greater good. We saw human expansion and growth as a potential threat to galactic stability. We never realized, he paused, struggling with words. We never realized how much we had come to depend on your people. Elena leaned back in her chair. This was progress, at least. Minister, with respect, the dependence was obvious to anyone who bothered to look at the actual trade flows. The problem was that nobody on the Consortium Council wanted to acknowledge it. You're right, Tharksel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. We were so focused on maintaining our position of authority that we ignored the reality of our situation. And now, he gestured helplessly. My people are starving, Captain. Our cities are failing. We have technology that could solve many problems, but without human manufacturing and maintenance, it's becoming useless. Before Elena could respond, her communicator chimed. Captain, came Lieutenant Commander Torres's voice. Priority message, from Fleet Command. General Blake is requesting an immediate conference. Elena excused herself, leaving Tharksel to wait while she took the call in her private office. General Harrison Blake's weathered face appeared on the display, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Elena, what's the situation with the Cathani? Same as the others, sir. They're desperate, but they're at least starting to acknowledge the reality of their situation, though I suspect this is just the beginning. Blake nodded grimly. That's what I'm calling about. We've got reports of Axiom Empire military movements in the Outer Rim, 3 battle groups, headed toward the Kepler colonies. Elena felt her blood run cold. The Kepler colonies were humanity's newest settlements, established just 5 years ago in a sector that had been considered neutral territory. Are they planning an invasion? Intelligence suggests they think they can force us back to the negotiating table by taking hostages, Blake replied. They're assuming we'll fold rather than risk civilian casualties. Sir, they're making a serious mistake. The Kepler colonies aren't defenseless. Blake's smile was predatory. No, they're not. But the Axiom don't know that. They still think of us as the compliant species that always chose diplomacy over conflict. They're about to learn otherwise. Elena returned to the conference room to find Tharxel exactly where she had left him, staring out at the star field visible through the room's viewports. His posture suggested a being who had lost everything he once believed in. "Minister," Elena said gently, "I need to ask you something directly. Are you aware of Axiom military movements toward human space?" Tharxel's crest fluttered rapidly, alarm and fear. "Captain, Yes, I had heard rumors. Some within the consortium believe that military pressure might succeed where diplomacy has failed. But I must tell you, I disagree with such actions completely. And yet you're here, speaking for the same consortium that's apparently willing to threaten human civilians." "I'm here speaking for my people, Captain. The consortium as a governing body is fractured. Some factions want to negotiate in good faith. Others want to use force. And still others believe that the galaxy would be better served by finding alternative suppliers to replace human production." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And how is that working out?" Tharxel's laugh was bitter. The Nexalari Collective attempted to increase their agricultural output to compensate for the loss of human food exports. Their crop yields fell by 60% because they couldn't replicate human soil enhancement techniques. The Spiral Consortium tried to restart their mining operations on worlds they had abandoned decades ago. The equipment failed within weeks because they no longer had the expertise to maintain it. "So you're saying the galaxy needs humanity?" "Captain, I'm saying the galaxy is dying without humanity. We spent so long thinking of your people as our suppliers that we forgot you were our partners. We let our own capabilities atrophy while we relied on human innovation and labor. Now we're paying the price for that arrogance." Elena's communicator chimed again. This time it was an emergency priority signal. "Captain Rodriguez, urgent message from the Kepler colonies. They're reporting Axiom fleet movements on their sensor networks." Elena stood immediately. "Minister Tharxel, I'm afraid our meeting will have to be postponed. We have a situation to address." But as she moved toward the door, the alien's voice stopped her. "Captain, please. If the Axiom attack human colonies, it will shatter any remaining hope for peaceful resolution. There are those of us who want to find a better path forward, but military action will empower the hardliners." Elena paused at the threshold. "Minister, I appreciate your position, but you need to understand something. Humanity isn't the same species that joined the consortium 43 years ago. We've learned from our mistakes. We've grown stronger. And we will not be bullied or coerced into accepting subordinate status." She left Tharxel in the conference room and headed for the command center, where the tactical displays were already showing the approaching Axiom fleet. 3 battle groups, just as General Blake had reported, moving with the mechanical precision that had made the Axiom the galaxy's premier military force. "Status report," Elena ordered as she entered the command center. "Axiom fleet will reach Kepler space in approximately 6 hours, reported Commander Sarah Kim, the station's tactical officer. "Colony defense forces are standing by, but they're heavily outnumbered." Elena studied the tactical display, noting the Axiom formation. They were approaching in a standard intimidation pattern, designed to overwhelm defenders and force quick surrender. It was a strategy that had worked against dozens of species over the past century. "Commander Kim, what's the status of the Kepler colony's new defense systems?" "Installation was completed 2 months ago, Captain. All systems are operational and crews are trained." Elena smiled grimly. The Axiom were about to learn that humanity's withdrawal from the consortium hadn't been an act of desperation. It had been a calculated move by a species that had been preparing for this moment for years. The Kepler colonies looked peaceful and vulnerable as the Axiom fleet approached. 3 small settlements on marginally habitable worlds, protected by nothing more than standard defensive platforms and a handful of patrol ships. To the Axiom commanders, it must have seemed like an easy target. Admiral Vexthul commanded the Axiom fleet from his flagship, the Dominion's Fist. His cybernetic enhancements processed tactical data with mechanical efficiency, identifying targets and calculating optimal attack vectors. The human colonies appeared to be essentially defenseless, exactly what the Axiom leadership had expected. "Open communications," Vexthul ordered, his mechanical voice echoing through the ship's bridge. "Let us offer these humans a chance to surrender before we demonstrate the consequences of defying the consortium." But before the communication could be established, the Axiom fleet's sensors detected something unexpected. Energy signatures were spiking throughout the Kepler system, not from the colonies themselves, but from what appeared to be empty space around them. "Admiral," reported the ship's tactical officer, "we're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system. Sources unknown." Vexthul's cybernetic eyes focused on the display. "Explain." "Sir, it appears the humans have deployed some kind of cloaked defense network. Sensor ghosts are resolving into solid contacts. Multiple platforms, sir. Heavy armament." As if summoned by the officer's words, space around the Axiom fleet suddenly blazed with light as dozens of hidden defense platforms decloaked simultaneously. The humans hadn't just been preparing for diplomatic withdrawal, they had been preparing for war. The defense platforms opened fire with weapons that the Axiom had never seen before, coherent energy beams that sliced through their ship's armor, like paper, and kinetic projectiles that moved faster than anything in the Axiom arsenal. Within minutes, the pride of the Axiom Empire was reduced to drifting wreckage. Admiral Vexthul's last transmission was a single word: impossible. The news of the Axiom fleet's destruction rippled across the galaxy within hours. The species that had once seemed invincible, whose military might had kept the consortium's member worlds in line for decades, had been utterly defeated by what they had assumed was a peaceful, compliant species. On New Havana Station, Elena received the battle report with satisfaction but no surprise. Humanity had learned from 4 decades of galactic politics that strength was the only currency that truly mattered. The difference was that humans had been smart enough to develop that strength in secret. When she returned to the conference room, she found Tharxel still waiting, but now he was receiving urgent communications from what remained of the Kithani government. His bioluminescent markings were cycling through patterns Elena had never seen before. "Captain," he said as she entered, "I've just received word of the Axiom fleet's fate. My people are in shock. No one believed humanity possessed such military capabilities." Elena took her seat calmly. "Minister, humanity has always possessed such capabilities. We simply chose not to advertise them. The question now is whether the galaxy is ready to accept humanity as an equal partner, or whether more demonstrations will be necessary." Tharxel's 4 eyes focused on her with something approaching awe. "Captain, I believe I speak for many when I say that the old way of doing things is dead. The consortium as it existed can no longer function. Too much has changed. Too much has been revealed." "Then what are you proposing?" "A new arrangement. True partnership with equal representation and mutual respect. No more attempts at control or domination. We've learned that the galaxy works best when all species contribute their strengths rather than when some try to control others." Elena nodded slowly. "That's a start, Minister. But words are easy. Actions are what matter. If you're serious about this, then the first step is simple. The complete dissolution of the Galactic Stability Act and a formal apology to humanity for the attempt to reduce us to subordinate status." "Done," Tharxel said immediately. "I'll carry that message back to what remains of the consortium leadership. Captain, I want you to know that there are many of us who genuinely want to build something better from the ashes of our mistakes." The Kithani delegation prepared to leave, Elena reflected on how completely the galaxy's power structure had shifted. The species that had once thought they could control humanity now came to them as supplicants, desperate for the resources and innovations that had made human civilization indispensable. But more than that, they had learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their resources or their technology. It was their willingness to say no, to walk away from a bad deal, and to stand up for themselves when pushed too far. The galaxy would be different now. Better, perhaps, if the other species had truly learned their lesson. But one thing was certain: humanity would never again be taken for granted. They had proven that cooperation required mutual respect, and that respect, once lost, could only be regained through genuine partnership. The age of human subservience was over. The age of human equality had begun.